Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the webinar on planning for your VOCA funding application. This is about the new Victims of Crime Act funding opportunity with the state for Program Enhancement and Expansion. This is brought to you by your two coalitions, the Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence and the Washington Coalition of Sexual Assault Programs. As we go along here, you'll be able to write in the chat box, and we're going to show you where that is in just a second. And you should also have the, I hope you have, the RFP from the state. You can get that by logging on to the OCVA website and downloading the request for proposals for this funding opportunity. And I also hope that you have the slides.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is our agenda for the webinar this morning. And my name is Amy, and I'm an intern at WSCADV.
A very smart intern who's learned all about the VOCA funding opportunity and what's happening on the federal level. We're going to have 3 opportunities for you all to ask questions and get answers. Okay, so here's how this webinar stuff works. It's best if you're listening through your speakers, so remember to unmute yourself, unmute your speakers. If that doesn't work, then you can listen by phone. Everybody is already on mute, and you can use the question box here to communicate with us. Please don't send me an email right now because I can't get into my email because I'm doing this webinar with you. And if you have a microphone and you want to be able to talk, you can press this raise your hand button, which is really cool. If your control panel disappears, click this orange arrow and you'll be able to get it back. And who's here today? We've got folks from the State Office of Crime Victims Advocacy. Tara, Tricia, Nikki, can you introduce yourselves?
Hi, this is Tara with OCVA.
And hi, this is Nikki Gleason, newly with OCVA again.
Yay. Good morning, this is Tricia.
Terrific. And Stephanie and Susan from DSHS?
Good morning, this is Stephanie Condon.
Hi, it's Susan Hannibal.
Thanks. And here at WSCADV, we've got myself, Judy Chen, Amy, who is our fabulous intern, and
Hi, I'm June Lovell.
June Lovell, formerly in all kinds of roles in our local field, and board member of WSCADV and now a volunteer. And Jean, can you introduce yourself?
Sure, this is Jean with WCSAP. Good morning.
Okay, thanks everyone. Nikki, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I'm just excited to be back and helping with the VOCA program, and this is my first day on the job, so I'm very excited to be here with y'all.
Great, thanks Nikki. Okay, so we had DSHS gathered input from the DSHS DV programs about questions that people might have for this funding opportunity. So Amy has collected all of your questions and summarized them, and we're going to make sure that we touch on all of these today.
So you can see on this slide summary of the top 10 questions, and we'll respond to these as we go along and summarize at the end.
Now we know that one of the biggest questions that people have is about is this going to be funding that we'll be able to count on in the future, and then also what's allowable, and then what are the eligible services, and then how flexible it is, and then is there going to be any kind of matching requirements. So stay tuned. So a little bit about the VOCA Victims of Crime Act funding. This is just a little bit of background if you're wondering where did all this money come from. Well, it came from the excellent advocacy efforts of all of you. So as you may know, Congress authorizes the funds for VOCA through the Victims of Crime Act, and then over the past few years, our national and state and tribal organizations have rallied to increase the support for sexual assault, domestic violence, and other crime victims for the funding for these kinds of programs to reflect the reality that this is a very prevalent form of violence, or these are very prevalent forms of violence that make up a high percentage of all crimes. In our state, people are not able to hear?
No. Tiffany Williams, Advocacy shirt. They're saying, has it started yet?
Okay,
They're not
so
seeing slides, they're not hearing audio.
okay, so I'm just going to pause here for a second, and can you write her back?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So so what happened is, on the federal level, is the Office of Victims of Crime solicited input from the field about how to better reflect the needs of domestic violence, sexual assault, and other crime victims. And this resulted in newly updated federal priorities and regulations. You can find this in the Federal Register, or ask Amy if you want to read it, because she has, and I have too. And then in Washington State, the state offices represented here, OCVA and DSHS, embarked on a very thoughtful process to get input from all kinds of providers, as well as criminal legal partners and other folks, with a series of regional in-person discussions, an online survey, feedback sessions, and opportunities for comments. DSHS and OCVA received input from over 160 people in 5 discussion sessions held all over the state, as well as from 141 people online, and created a state plan for the VOCA funding through 2019. And this is rolling out with funding for investing in improved staff compensation for direct service staff, basic FTE improvements for programs that have only 1 or 2 staff, and this funding opportunity is to enhance your program work, your direct services, including emergency financial assistance and development of new service strategies and expansion.
Hold on. We've got too many people that can't hear.
Okay, so we're just going to pause because
yes.
we're having a problem
Yes.
with the sound.
Yes, everybody, several people, slides are progressing, no sound. Becca is on this.
Okay, so you typing that in?
Hey, we've got.
Can you mute your mic for a second?
Okay. Hey folks, thank you for your patience here. We're having a few folks are having problems with the sound, so we're just responding to everyone individually as we go, and then we're also recording the webinar. Okay, so stay tuned for more funding opportunities. There's a tribal application that already went out and is in process, and then there's going to be another funding opportunity for programs serving historically marginalized populations such as immigrants, LGBTQ survivors, and communities of color. Okay, Tara, take it away.
Okay, so this Enhancement Expansion application, let me say a few words about the design idea behind the application first, and that is to have one document that can encompass up to 3 program types, being domestic violence, sexual assault, and crime victims. So you may apply for funding within your current program type. In other words, for this particular application, we're asking folks to stay in your current lane or lanes to expand or enhance your services. What's different about this application is primarily the VOCA rules are being applied to this funding, and the new VOCA rules have lifted some previous restrictions. We can now support some services, activities, and costs that we weren't able to in the past. So the framework that you're familiar with around domestic violence, sexual assault, and crime victim services and standards has broadened a bit for this particular funding opportunity. And we're encouraging you to think outside the box a little bit around that. So we've tried to design the application to get at that. The screen you're looking at right now on the webinar is where you would land if you went through a series of clicks on our website, the OCVA website, to get to the actual application material. So you're looking at the Department of Commerce, serving communities, crime victims, OCVA, grants and funding. That's a lot of clicks, and I've also sent out an email last week, February 23rd, with the link to this website where all the application materials live. So you should have gotten 2 emails by now, one from Tricia Smith on February 16th. It had the actual application attachment. It was a very large attachment. I followed up that email on February 23rd without the attachment in case it was going to your junk mail or getting blocked, and it just has the link to the application. So that's the thinking behind the application document and where you can find it. When we advance to the next slide, it's just going to explain that I'm taking questions and answers via email, so you can email me, and I'll make sure everyone has access to the same information. So I'll be posting a Q&A document to the website. Look for that on March 6th and March 27th. After March 27th, I can no longer accept any more questions. So everything, all the information that we have will be available on the website at that time. And applications must be received here.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey folks, we just discovered we forgot to press a button here. That's the it's an important one. So we're going to Tara, I'm going to ask you to start again on that part. And I apologize for our technical problems.
That's okay. Did you want me to start over on this slide that says OCVA grants and funding?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, sure. So I wanted to explain a little bit about the design idea behind the application. This is one document that encompasses up to 3 program types: domestic violence, sexual assault, and crime victims. So this one document, this one application, is what you can use to apply for funding within your current program type or types. In other words, for this funding opportunity, we're asking folks to stay in their current lanes, so to speak. What's different about this application is that we're applying the VOCA rules to this funding, and the new VOCA rules have lifted some previous restrictions, and we can now support some services, activities, and costs that we weren't able to in the past. So you're familiar with the framework around domestic violence, sexual assault, and crime victim services and standards, and this is broadened a little bit to include some of those new service, activities, and costs ideas that you may have. There was an email that went out on February 16th with the application attached, and if you haven't seen that, look for a message from Tricia Smith. I followed up that email with another message on February 23rd, and that should have gone through without the application attached. It was a rather large attachment, so I think some of it may have gotten blocked or gone to people's junk mail. So that email on the 23rd has the link to the application. And what you're looking at, oh, I would also add DSHS contractors should have gotten a message from DSHS directly as well. So we've tried to send it out a few times, a few different ways, and it's also on the OCVA website. So the screen that you're looking at now is the Office of Crime Victims Advocacy Grant and Funding site, and you get here through a series of clicks, which I can send the link out again if needed, but it's Department of Commerce, Serving Communities, Crime Victims, Office of Crime Victims Advocacy, Grants and Funding. So that's what you're looking at here, and it has all the application materials listed. So the next slide is just going to explain that opportunities for questions and answers, it's open now. You can email me with any questions you have. I'll send you a direct response, and I'll also be capturing all the Q&A in one place, and I'll post that document on the OCVA website March 6th and March 27th, so everyone has access to all the information. The Q&A period stops after March 27th, and applications must be received here at OCVA by March 29th at 5 p.m. We'll be making award decisions in mid-April, and this will include a panel review process and evaluation of the applications. And the award period is going to be 2 years, July 1st, 2017 through June 30th, 2019.
Terrific. Thanks, Tara.
So on this slide, you can see the programs who are eligible to apply for VOCA funding. It comes down to OCVA-funded crime victim service centers and sexual assault programs, and DSHS-funded domestic violence service programs.
So here's how much, this is Judy from WSCADV. Here's how much you can apply for, and something to note is that you can apply for, you can write a proposal for 2 years, but you submit a 1-year budget. There's one application per program, so even if you're a DVSA crime victims agency, you send in one application rather than 3 separate applications. Here's the scoring criteria, and you can find this in the giant RFP. This is attachment C, pages 1 and 2, and it explains what the scoring is going to be based on. And the checklist for your application, here are all the pieces that go into the application, and we're going to briefly touch on the things that have the red arrows, the narrative, the proposed services form, and the budget detail. And something just to note for those of you who are submitting the application yourself, it needs to be 1 original and then 3 unbound copies. So remember when I said that you will be submitting a proposal for 2 years, but the budgets and the services form you do only for the first year. And this can be found in the giant application guidelines on pages 31 and 32. So here is the proposed services form, and this is where you mark. So if you're an SA program and all you do is sexual assault victim services, all you need to check in that column that has all the X's on it is just SA. But if you also have DV services and you want to apply for DV and SA services, then you mark how that's going to go. And you can see how it's just to explain to the reviewers what you're applying for under what categories. For the budget form, again, this is to explain to the reviewers, are you applying for, how much are you applying for DV, how much for sexual assault, and how much for victim services. Now, Tara, there's a question about, is the $95,000 available for each program or per organization. So for example, if you have a DV and an SA program, can you apply for $95,000 per program or just only in total?
In total.
In total. Thank you. So here's the budget worksheet, and there are a bunch of budget worksheets, and I want to just point out that for each of these line items here, salaries, benefits, blah, 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 there's a budget worksheet for each of these, so there's a total of 5 budget worksheets. So here's an example of one of them. This would be for your salary line items. There is a match requirement and a volunteer requirement, and you can find these on pages 14 through 17 of the application guidelines. Now under the match, okay, there's a formula. The formula, I just want to point out that the math here, even though you would think, say the award is $100,000 and there's the match is to provide not less than a 20% match, the match is not $20,000, it's $25,000. And we don't need to dive into it now, but this is the formula to use so that you're calculating the right match. If you need help, you can call Tara or email her, and you can request a waiver, but as it's noted here, it's unlikely that the feds, OVC, will approve a total waiver for all of your match. So even if you can't, so be not alarmed if you can't do all of the match, you could apply for a waiver. Just keep in mind it's unlikely that that the feds will approve a 100% waiver. Okay, so we're just going to pause here and see if there's any questions and comments.
Good, that 95K one was.
Okay.
Hey Judy, this is Tricia.
Hey Tricia.
Can I add a quick clarification on the match slide?
Thank you.
I just wanted to share that for a lot of existing grantees, you are probably used to having your match met with your state funds in your contracts or grants. So for successful bidders, we can help figure out how much state money you still have to help determine match amounts. That option is still there. It's just with an increase in federal funds, you may not have enough state funds to fully meet the match. And then also that the VOCA rule did update it, so tribal programs do not have a match requirement.
Terrific. Thanks. Let's see, we also have a question from Maddie Graves Wilson from Beyond Survival. Maddie, you're unmuted. Do you have a question?
She wants to know what the volunteer match looks
What does the volunteer match look like? Tara or Tricia, can you speak to that?
Maddie, do you mean the volunteer requirement or the use of volunteers for in-kind match?
I'm not sure if Maddie is coming through, but see, she says yes for the use of volunteers for in-kind.
Let me see. I think there's additional language in the application around how, what, and how to determine match and what you can use. So let me look at that real quick.
Yes, the use of volunteers for income.
Yeah, so page 15, you can use volunteer time to meet match.
Excellent.
You just need to be able to calculate the rate of pay for those volunteers and demonstrate that.
As well.
And there's a question from D'Angela. Can local funds be used for the match?
Yes.
Great. Okay.
Unless it's federal pass-through funds.
Yeah, Judy, just the local funds question, unless it's federal pass-through funds can't be used to demonstrate match for federal VOCA.
Okay, so folks, these are really great reasons to reach out to OCVA to ask questions. And we've got one more question and then we're going to move on. This is from Christine Wall. Hey Christine, my understanding is that you can use direct service volunteers and also other volunteers such as professionals that provide services to your program, like therapists and yoga teachers. Is that correct?
Yes.
Great. And then from Catherine Burr that private foundation funds could also be used for a match, right? So just cash money coming from other sources.
Yes.
Terrific. Okay. Yay! So I've put in these baby animal pictures because I don't know about you, it gets me a little on edge to go through these giant applications. So this is to help us be calm and centered about this fantastic funding opportunity. Next up, we're going to talk about eligible services. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so in sum, these are the broad categories of what is eligible for services and expenses. And now we're going to explore each of these categories. So immediate needs, advocacy and emotional support, mental health, supporting people to participate in criminal legal proceedings, transportations and agency automobile, public awareness, relocation and housing support, woo-woo, and systems advocacy.
So here are some of the eligible services to help meet the immediate needs of survivors. So that includes the crisis intervention services, accompanying victims to hospitals, hotline counseling, and safety planning. And again, this is all related to the immediate needs of survivors.
So this is directly from the RFP, and we've highlighted a couple things that you might be interested in. For example, paying for people to replace their locks or their windows. For people who their offender was a caregiver, some temporary in-home care for them. Same thing with nursing home or adult foster care placement. Non-prescription and prescription medications on an emergency basis. Hearing aids and eyeglasses. How many times do we know survivors who had to leave suddenly and were not able to get their hearing aids or eyeglasses? So that's really terrific. Yay!
For advocacy and emotional support, there are some services that are available here. What's really neat is the traditional, cultural, and alternative therapy or healing. There's funding available for these kinds of services.
As well as just our regular old advocacy, which is so important to support.
So there's also available funding for mental health and peer support, including outpatient therapy and counseling and outpatient substance abuse treatment.
And then support to assist survivors and victims to participate in criminal legal proceedings or other public proceedings. In terms of just a note here on interpretation, for folks who are deaf or hard of hearing or limited English proficient, OCVA and DSHS want contractors to use the OCVA Language Bank resource first. So you do not need to cover interpretation costs in this proposal. If you receive an award, then you will be given a Language Bank grant. And please feel free to write in your questions, and we'll get to them in a second because I think there are all kinds of interesting questions about what's eligible. So there's one that's come up about dental work, and we're going to get to that in just a second. Thanks, Nancy.
For transportation and agency vehicles, there's some funding that can be available for automobile expenses for a client when necessary for health and safety. Also expenses for agency vehicles.
So folks from rural programs, we know this is a really big need for your programs as well as the participants that you serve. So we wanted to just highlight this for you.
There's also public awareness and educational presentations. So there could be funding for kind of public awareness and education out in the community.
Okay, relocation and housing. This is a big one, a new one. So it is eligible to request funds to help people relocate, also to help people with their to provide rental assistance, security deposits, moving, helping someone stay in their own home. And the thing to note about this is that this is a brand new kind of thing. So applicants need to be able to have a plan that's approved by the state about how you're going to do this. So, and we're going to get to what that plan looks like in just a second here.
And systems advocacy, services and expenses for multidisciplinary teams, so different groups of professionals and agency coming together for a comprehensive assessment.
And doing your systems work with coordinated community response. So, direct financial assistance. Supporting direct emergency financial assistance, which is being coined here as EFA. EFA expenses are eligible if they relate to immediate health and safety, and applicants that are successful, so if you do receive an award, then there'll be a process for you to submit a plan to DSHS or OCVA about how you're going to do this and what that looks like. And I just want to suggest this is a terrific thing to turn to your coalitions for assistance with. We'd love to help you think this through if you do receive an award. Depending on the amount of funds that you would be asking for example, for reimbursement, the state grant managers may follow up to get verification about an expenditure, and you can always seek pre-approval also. So again, very exciting. Hats off to OCVA and DSHS. And then just briefly on some non-eligible services and expenses as far as we understand them.
So active investigation and prosecution of criminal activities is not allowed. Capital expenses, crime victims compensation.
So I want to note that the civil legal aid and assistance, what is eligible is legal advocacy, and please state folks correct me if I'm wrong. Legal advocacy is eligible. Services by attorneys for civil legal assistance is not eligible. Is that correct?
That's right.
Great. Okay. Oh, and then education or job training for survivors and victims is not eligible. Food and beverages for staff training or community meetings is not eligible, but Tara, would food or beverages for example, for support groups, would that be eligible?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so for services it's eligible, but not for the systems work that we do or for training our own staff. So here's some other things. I want to note that prevention expenses are not eligible. So again, education, community awareness, public awareness, and outreach is eligible. Prevention is not. They're under DSHS. I want to just note there's another funding stream for that. And also not purchasing vehicles for participants. Okay. We're going to go through now, keep writing in your questions, and we're going to go through now to respond to the survey questions that people had about all kinds of cool work that you all are doing and the expenses that you're hoping might be eligible.
Hi, this is Tara from OCVA. So we're responding to some questions and comments related to a survey that DSHS sent out last fall, and also some questions that we've gotten from sexual assault service providers and crime victim service providers. We're just going to go through a series of slides about proposed ideas or costs, and to say whether they're allowable or eligible or not. So these first few slides are all things that are eligible. Food, including pet food, baby and child needs, transportation, medicine, and that's medicine needed on an emergent basis that there are no other resources for or can't be obtained within a reasonable amount of time. Phones, driver's license, including identification, car repair, child care, cultural items, linen, household goods, etc. So this is by no means an exhaustive list. These are just examples. And to remind everyone, we're still working within the parameters of the VOCA rules when we say whether something is eligible or ineligible. We'll keep going through more lists, but I just want to say in general, if you're thinking about including any of these costs in your application, we're just looking for clear descriptions and a justification in the application. And also, generally speaking, a lot of these things are considered that phrase or under the umbrella of emergency financial assistance. So some of these things could be bundled, and it may not be necessary to list out every single thing exhaustively in your budget if it's under an umbrella category of emergency financial assistance. And if you're a successful bidder, we can work with you on how that appears in your final budget. On the next slide, we've got some more items to talk through.
Okay, this is Tricia with OCVA, and again, these are some costs. The questions have been coming up about what's eligible, and really most of these items on the list would be eligible per the VOCA rule. There were a few things I wanted to call out. I'll start at the bottom and work my way up. Flexible financial assistance is, I think, a phrase that might be something used more often in the DV field. I don't think we have a shared understanding maybe of what that is. So I can't say just based on that statement if that's approved or not. What I can tell you is costs need to be related, as you've heard us say a few times, to the immediate health and safety needs of victims and survivors, connected to the victimization. That's a certain justification that we may be asking you for. The application has been trying to be really clear that we do want to support the emergency financial assistance needs of victims and survivors. What the flexible piece means, I'm not quite sure, so that's something we would be working with you on just to have further clarification on what you all are needing there. This could be something we can work into the Q&A if you want to send some more specific examples of what that might look like. Happy to dig into that with you together. And the one definite no, is mortgage costs. The VOCA rule specifically says we cannot use these funds to support mortgage payments, and I think that might be what's been alluded to here in transfer fees for housing title. I think that could be connected to a mortgage cost if I'm understanding that bullet point correctly. And in regards to the point about perhaps an old housing debt, I will say that we are able to support rental and housing assistance. Again, it needs to be related to the victimization, the health and safety needs of the person you're working with. And it can be used to help someone avoid homelessness. That's a health and safety issue. So those are kind of the considerations and justifications we're working with within these housing and relocation expenses. And if you are a successful applicant, you've seen in the RFP where we've said we may be asking you for plans and procedures around some of those things. So you don't need to do that now, but be thinking about it. And as Judy kindly offered, the coalitions would be a great resource for that. And that's something we'd be asking you for if you were a successful applicant. You don't have to include that with your proposal.
Okay, so continuing on, the next slide is costs around advocacy, staff, and contractors. We're talking about mileage, including mobile advocacy, culturally driven services, support groups, trauma-informed care, adding FTEs, adding subcontractors, and there's some examples listed here: behavioral health, interpreters, substance abuse treatment. As Judy mentioned earlier, interpreters, I mean, they could technically be included in a subcontract, but would really probably look to the language bank funding opportunity and support successful bidders in getting a language bank grant to pay for interpreter costs. So they're not necessarily included as a subcontractor cost in this grant. Behavioral health and substance abuse treatment, as you've seen in the application, we're looking for there to be a connection, to be a part of comprehensive service model provided by your organization. Of course, we would be supporting staff training. And the last bullet, a question around serving boys and men and all genders. Yes, of course, and this is already a requirement.
We've got a few questions on systems advocacy costs and what's eligible. And for this, I would offer to look at systems a little bit more broadly. You know, it doesn't have to just be criminal or civil or legal justice systems, but we've interpreted that in a broader sense. You know, be thinking about schools, faith organizations, perhaps you have military institutions in your community, maybe juvenile facilities or confinement facilities. So yes, certainly coordination of activities and systems is eligible with these funds. And these are two examples, but just wanted to put a quick shout out to maybe be thinking a little bit broader about that. The testing strategies for high-risk cases, I interpreted that to be maybe doing like a case example or like a trial run per se with the systems providers and responders in your community. And yes, that would be eligible. If I'm misinterpreting that, Judy, please just let me know and we can clarify real quick.
I don't know who had this question, but I think it might be, this is Judy, this might be related to some of the strategies that have emerged that are being tested by, on the federal level by OVW for reducing the risk of homicide for DV victims. And there's some testing occurring in a couple of cities and some promising practices around systems coordination to identify with criminal legal partners cases that are where there's a high risk of fatality.
Okay, we'll dig into that a little bit for the Q&A. I'm not super familiar with what those look like, but yeah, we'll follow up.
Okay,
Go ahead.
I think that we'll get to that around what my guess is that some of it may be eligible in terms of the advocacy work and the systems work, but the evaluation or the research of it would not be eligible.
Yeah, that sounds accurate.
Okay.
And then I would also offer a quick clarification. I think, as many of you know, OCVA does fund victim witness units, and so we already have resources supporting that work. So just to be clear, when we say systems advocacy, sometimes that can be interpreted as like a systems-based victim witness unit. That is not eligible with these funds.
So moving along, these are services or expenses that are not or may not be eligible. So just to clarify, capital or building improvements are not eligible. Research and evaluation is not eligible. However, victim surveys and needs assessments are allowable. Education and job training are not allowable for this particular funding opportunity. OCVA and DSHS are still, we're willing to look into this and clarify this for future funding opportunities, but is not included in this application. So not able to pay for classes for folks, including financial literacy. The legal assistance piece we covered, that's specific to civil legal aid, representation by an attorney. Prevention is not eligible. Medical bills or medical debts, that doesn't fit within that emergent needs category is not allowable. PO box, professional license, and then this last point, youth outreach stipends. I think we would need to know more there. Not sure exactly what that is, but that could be explored. If you have a specific question or scenario, feel free to email it to me, and I can answer that and include it in the Q&A that gets posted to the website.
I did want to offer too a quick clarification. The reason why the civil legal assistance is not eligible with this funding opportunity is because we have put a significant amount of resources towards that in our state already through the Office of Civil Legal Assistance, OCLA. Is that right?
Office, yes, AID, Office
AID.
Civil Legal Aid.
OCLA. And we'll be putting out more information about how all programs can tap into that resource, and they will also be doing a workshop at the WSCADV conference for those of you going to the conference.
Terrific. I think we should pause here and answer questions, and then Jean will get to the thinking about core and comprehensive in a minute. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just pause here for some questions. We're going to start with Nancy Tiffany. Hi, Nancy. Nancy, you're unmuted. You had a question about dental work for survivors? Okay, I'm going to just read your question. Would dental work be eligible if the abuser caused the dental damage? So again, very typical.
Sure, and obviously directly related to the abuse or victimization, and if it falls within the immediate health and safety needs, you know, that emergency financial assistance category, it could certainly be considered.
Okay, so I'm going to explore this a little bit. So if somebody has dental work where their teeth, where they're having difficulty functioning on a, with their daily functioning because of their teeth being knocked out, I'm guessing that falls under immediate need. What if somebody can't get a job because they have lost a lot of teeth due to abuse?
Yeah, I understand. That can be common. I think we'd have to consider case by case. We're looking for there to be connections and justification, as we've been saying, connection to the abuse or victimization, and meeting the health and safety needs of survivors. So I think, in general, dental work can be considered, and then if there's a specific, scenario or case, we can work with grantees on that. Okay,
thanks. We've got Mary Ellen had a question about, Mary Ellen, can you, I'm so sorry we're having some technical problems here. So Mary Ellen, can you speak? Or I can just read? Oh, yay, there you are.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Great, thanks. So we currently, as a CSAP, provide medical advocacy. We're looking at expanding that service, both in how we provide it and where we provide it. So would that fall into the eligible, because we're already doing it, but it is an expansion?
Yeah, sounds like it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. Thank you much. That was easy.
Maybe one quick clarification. I think this is broader than Mary Ellen's question, but when we say you need to stay in your lane per se, that would mean if you are a sexual assault services program, you would be continuing to provide sexual assault services, expanding and enhancing those. This isn't an opportunity to then become a domestic violence program if you're not already providing domestic violence services through a DSHS contract. So hopefully that's clear. Let me know if not. Judy, are there any more questions?
Sorry, Rachel had a question about, Rachel Elam, about paralegals and about upgrading surveillance. I'm going to guess computer surveillance or security surveillance and as well as computers. So the first one, paralegals.
What's the specific question? Is it just paralegal work in general?
Can paralegal work with victims be eligible?
Well, how is that different from legal advocacy?
Yeah, I think we'd have to know how that differs from legal advocacy and or civil legal assistance.
Okay. So Rachel, that would be a good thing to follow up with OCVA or DSHS on.
I didn't ask that. Who asked that?
Rachel Elam?
Who's that? No.
Okay.
Oh, no. Somebody's under my name.
Somebody wrote, would paralegal support be allowed?
Okay, hiring a paralegal.
Hiring a paralegal, okay.
Again, it depends on to do what service activity, what's the function. I mean, hiring additional staff, FTE, is, broadly speaking, that's fine to propose in this application. But to do what?
Then Rachel, you also had a question about computers?
Yeah, upgrading the computers and the surveillance systems.
So generally, you know, software and equipment, furniture, those type of expenses are allowable.
They are.
Mm-hmm. I think they would need to be connected to this proposal. So if they would be supporting the work that you're doing with this expansion and enhancement application, you could purchase software and equipment to support your proposal as a successful bidder. And then as far as the surveillance question, can you clarify what that's for? Are you saying for like the organization or for?
To keep intruders out of the shelter.
For the program.
Yeah, for cameras.
Yeah, we probably need to know more information about how they would be used, and is it upgrading an existing system that you have with the shelter or a new system? We just need to have more information about that.
Okay.
So it's eligible, and again, you know, I would connect it to this proposal and scope of work you're doing. You know, if you're going to be providing domestic violence services with this, then that seems to make sense and could be justified. But yeah, we would need you to connect those dots and explain it.
Okay.
Terrific. Thanks, Rachel. So Anne Marie, you're unmuted. You had a question about life coaching programs?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I was thinking about hiring an advocate who could work on these skills with our clients, with our residents and folks who are in the community but maybe not be living with us.
Okay, so a staff person to provide life skills coaching.
Yeah, and I put a description of kind of what that would look like. Working on self-esteem, setting personal boundaries, building better communication patterns, learning to manage stress and time, finding self-expression through art, dealing with change.
I think generally speaking, that could fall under the category of advocacy.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, be eligible.
Terrific. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Marie.
The one caveat you said, you mentioned also maybe doing this in the community. So I would say if you're doing it more broadly for people that may not be victims or survivors, that would not be eligible. I don't know if that's what you had meant by that, but just to clarify.
It would be just for victims and survivors. It wouldn't be just open to anybody.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
There are some programs that have been offered like that in the past that have been like part of our community college, and what I have wanted to do is really customize those offerings for survivors of DV, and I'd like to start with those who are in a shelter situation first, and also include women who may not be living with us, but who are survivors but have other living options. And it would be only for them, all done through a DV lens, and not just a let's get back on our feet lens. That's, of course, part of it, but really looking at it through the DV lens.
And I was just going to add, this is Stephanie, Anne-Marie, that as I think Tara and Trish already commented, that really seems like that aligns as a form of advocacy, and keeping in mind that this is a competitive application for program enhancement and expansion. I think really sort of elaborating on how this is an enhancement of the advocacy services your agency is providing, or sort of like a new specialized form of advocacy that you're really kind of intentionally enhancing your programming with.
Okay. Yeah, I'm envisioning actually that the person who would be delivering those services would be separate from the advocate that someone would be working with, and they'd be, almost offering these services almost in a class format.
Okay.
Terrific. Okay, thanks, Anne-Marie. Next, we've got Christine Wall with a question about the dental needs. Christine? Christine? Okay, we'll come back to Christine in a minute. Tiffany, let's see here, where are you? Tiffany, you had some questions about can you apply for enhancement in 2 areas, and then also about a children's advocate and a therapist. Tiffany?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, that's the question. I typed it in because we weren't sure if you could hear us or not.
Okay, so can you state what your question is?
We said up to $95,000. We're trying to be creative with that money, and wondering if expansion. Do we need expansion in both areas? So with children's advocacy and therapy, would we focus on one area, or can we apply it to 2 areas?
Are you talking about domestic violence services, sexual assault services, or crime victim services?
DV and SA, both of those.
Yeah, if you are a current grantee or contractor for both those types of services, you can apply to expand in both those program areas.
Or not, you can pick one. That's also okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we had a question from Maddie. June, can you tell me what is the youth outreach funding resource you just mentioned a little bit earlier? Something about youth outreach funding, Tara?
Yeah, I think it was slide 41. It was actually on the slide where we were talking about ineligible expenses, and it was the last bullet point, youth outreach stipends. And we just said that, well, I'm not exactly sure what that means, that, that's something that popped up on the survey, so we didn't have much context for it. So we would need to know more. If you're thinking about including something like that in your application, just be more clear. And if you have a specific question or scenario in mind, you can email me as the application coordinator, and I can answer it over email and then post it to the Q&A on the website.
Thanks. Okay. Okay, Christine, let's see, let's find you. Christine, you had a question about the dental work?
Yes. So I wanted to go back to your comment about no teeth and maybe couldn't get a job. We know that for domestic violence victims, sometimes lots of things physical ailments are not addressed, teeth, other things too, when they're in the relationship. And so would those things be seen, or could those things be seen as emergency once they've left the relationship, because now they feel safe to address those kinds of things? Could OCVA look at that as a sort of broad determination that the leaving is the emergent classification? I'm just trying to see how we can simplify some of this, because a lot of it is going to be, does this count, does this count?
Sure. Yeah, and the bottom line is the VOCA rules apply here with this 100% VOCA funded grant, and the VOCA rules do state that pretty much most medical costs cannot be covered, with the exception of immediate health and safety. Immediate being, it can't be accessed in a reasonable amount of time, usually within 48 hours. And again, we're looking, on page 8 of the application, it outlines expenses that respond to the immediate needs of crime victims, and actually includes the language from the VOCA rules in one of the bullet points around covering medical costs. So it's pretty limited.
Yeah, I'll take another look at it. I was just trying to sort of maybe see if there was a broader category that we could sort of agree to. But yeah, okay, thank you.
Thanks, Christine. Now we have D'Angela. D'Angela, I think there's a technical difficulty, so I'm going to read your question, which was, oh my gosh, where did it go? Oops. Sorry, hold on here a minute, folks. About yoga. Okay, would yoga be considered a healing therapy? As a survivor, I deal with permanent nerve damage. I imagine this would be a great deal of help for people.
Yeah, it would fall under the, alternative treatment, holistic healing activities, and certainly be eligible. You can propose it. And again, with those sorts of activities and approaches, we're looking for it to be part of your program service delivery strategy or model, somehow connected to the services that you provide, and not kind of like a voucher to go to a yoga class. Like, how is it connected to advocacy? Is your yoga instructor trauma informed? So we'd be looking to things like that.
Oh, that's super helpful guidance. Thanks, Tara. Now we have Melva. Melva, you're on. Melva? Okay, I'm going to read her question. What about life skills classes? Can this grant pay for an advocate to teach life skill classes, such as how to manage a budget, how to pay your bills, cooking on a budget, that kind of thing?
That sounds a little similar to the question we got before about life skills, and so I'm going to, Susan helped to answer that. I'm going to ask her to pitch in and see if she has anything else to add. And we basically said it sounds like, some specialized advocacy, basically, and that Stephanie had some pointers about, how to speak to that in your proposal. I'm not sure if there's anything more we want to say, or if there's a different angle to that question.
I don't think Mel is able to speak, so maybe she could follow up directly with you if she has more questions. Okay, and then Deborah Hyman. Deborah, are you there? Okay, Deborah had a question. Are there screening or eligibility requirements for clients receiving the relocation and housing and emergency financial assistance? What's it going to look like if programs want to do relocation and housing and provide emergency financial support?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for those types of assistance and costs, successful bidders will be asked to submit a plan, so policies or procedures on how those resources are provided. doesn't have to be part of your application, but successful bidders will be asked to submit something around that.
And again, that's a great thing to ask for support from your coalitions on.
Yes.
When you get to that point. And then Melissa, are you there, Melissa? Melissa's question was, would covering salary costs associated with an advocate coordinating direct service volunteers be an appropriate use of expansion funds?
Hold on a minute.
Okay. So,
okay, we're here.
Great.
So this is Stephanie, we were just conferring for a moment. And so, yeah, that's certainly something that's within the scope of this funding opportunity. And again, just keeping in mind with this being a competitive process, that you're able to really clearly articulate how this is an expansion or enhancement of your programming, what the compelling need is for the volunteer coordinator position, and being able to really articulate, how that will translate into benefits for survivors and a valuable service for, a valuable activity for survivors.
Okay, thanks. Now, Carlin Ufum, are you there from REWA? Carlin? Okay. Carlin says, we have been planning to hire a community educator to develop curriculum on DV and sexual assault work in the refugee and immigrant communities. Is this funding eligible or is that an eligible activity to provide community organizing or community mobilization work? For instance, could we provide community education to culturally specific communities, refugees and immigrants, on DV and sexual assault?
Just one moment, please.
It's a great question. And while we're pausing, I want to say we're going to take a break here in just a minute so that we can all have a bio break. So we're going to take one or two more questions and then go on break and then come back.
Okay, I think we're kind of in the same spot here as we were with the last question. Outreach and awareness activities, and what I believe the role there is an eligible activity. And again, because this is a competitive application, being able to speak to and justify how that's an enhancement or expansion of your services, the compelling need for that, and how that's going to be building on and improving services for survivors. I'd really encourage folks to look really closely at Attachment C, the proposal narrative. That's really detailing out the thoughts and considerations that we're having for this application.
Terrific. Okay, this is Judy. I have one or two questions. This is my question. Is tattoo removal eligible? So, for example, a lot of times folks have had tattoos that someone who has abused them has had them get, and they want to have that tattoo removed either because it is traumatizing to have that tattoo or because they're unable to participate in society with that kind of tattoo.
Hold on one moment. We just did a quick consultation here, and I think we would need to do some homework on our end, so go ahead and submit that to me via email, and I can address it in the Q&A document. We just need to look into that further. I certainly understand the scenario being presented, but we just need some more time.
Okay. And then, Tricia, was there more you wanted to say about the flexible financial assistance questions that had come up in the survey about what might be eligible?
I don't think so.
Okay. I want to point out somebody had written in a comment about old housing debt. And the old housing debt that, I don't know, Jean, if there's anything you want to add here that WSCADV is familiar with, is when participants are unable to get into a new apartment because they have back rent due at an old apartment. So sometimes people are able to pay, they're able to pay their own rent, but they don't have the means to pay off old debt, which sometimes an advocate can negotiate down with a previous landlord. So would that be an eligible expense?
Yeah, I think as we talked about earlier, housing assistance is eligible, and again, within those parameters of, is it connected to the victimization? Is it maybe helping someone to avoid a homelessness situation, so it is related to health and safety needs? Those are the connecting points that we would need, and we may be talking through with you. Successful applicants may need to talk with us about that further, but yes, overall, housing assistance is eligible.
Terrific.
This is, I was just going to add to follow up Tricia's response too, that you know, many of the scenarios that are being outlined on the call today, we certainly you know, understand and you know, want to do everything we can to be able to support those needs with these funds. And so when there are questions about, you know, what is the link between that need and the victimization and immediate health and safety, just want folks to know that we want to make sure that we understand that rationale, so that if you're asked about that expense, OCVA is asked about that expense in being audited or monitored, that we can always explain, here's how this is connected to the victimization and immediate health and safety. So I just want folks to kind of experience that as, you know, questioning like the legitimacy of the need. It's really just making sure that we understand and can articulate that connection.
That's really helpful. That's a really helpful framework for understanding that you all need to be able to justify what you're doing, because Washington State, again, is being a leader here with the VOCA funds. So thank you. Folks, we're going to take a break and be back in 5 minutes. This is a good time for you to run down the hall if you need to, or gather your thoughts about more questions you might have, and then we will be back in 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Now it's cheaper, right? Maybe $4 there, but $1 extra, they're going to look at me like a horrible person. Yeah, percentage wise, that's a huge tip. Percent tip up. Right. Yeah. Or you have to click through like 50-cent tip. You have to click through 4 buttons to be able to get to another screen. Other. I was reading Oregon. No. They studied that people typically pick the middle option, so there's usually 3 options on the screen. people don't pick on both sides. I feel like it's 15, 18, no. Like 18, 20. They get to pick, so some places it's 10, 15, 20 or something. So a lot of businesses are noticing that in there. And it just, people just click. Could be $3 tip on $4 drink. In other if you're sitting down and you're coming to your table 10% if you're going to. Oh, really? Yeah. I'm a good consider. Oh my God. Really? Oh. I don't think they are. Yeah. Well, I just heard that. But they don't know. Shady to me. Yeah. Instagram.
Sorry about that, folks. That's funny.
You didn't say anything inappropriate, right?
Yeah, well, I was out of the room.
No, we didn't. We were just talking. We were just logistics. Buyers return.
Okay. Are we on?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Yay! Welcome back, everybody. Okay. Take it away, Jean from WSCAP.
Okay. Hi, thank you. This is Jean from WSCAP. So I wanted to share, as we're thinking, this is such a great opportunity to think about immediate essential services to enhancing and expanding services and creating more comprehensive services. So I wanted to share some information that came out of the resource sharing project in the National Sexual Violence Resource Center on building comprehensive sexual assault services through the Sadie Assault Demonstration Initiative. And many of the components would apply to other victims as well. When we think about core services, That's really the essential services that meet the immediate needs of survivors. We often think of these as 24-hour crisis intervention, hospital and legal accompaniment, information and referral for other needs. By getting to comprehensive services, we want to think beyond the immediate needs and also think about what opportunities will help survivors to heal, such as considering physical, social, emotional, and spiritual needs of sexual assault survivors or other survivors of violence and their allies, and really creating services that go beyond the most immediate pressing needs to support more in-depth healing, empowerment, and integration. And that's the next slide.
Let's see. There you go.
Great. So in creating comprehensive services, really briefly, and we can certainly send this information out as well to be able to give you a little bit more of what I'm going to be talking about. And thinking about creating comprehensive services, considering the following approaches to services, that they're rooted in anti-oppression and empowerment-based framework, in terms of being responsive to multidimensional needs of survivors. And I think it's been really great that people have been talking about other things or other services that they're considering to be more comprehensive, considering the intersections of all forms of oppression and how this affects survivors' experiences. Services made available across the lifespan. It's pretty self-explanatory, but thinking about from children through later life, and also being responsive, services being responsive to all stages of the healing journey, regardless of when the assault or disclosure took place. Accessible accommodations, services that are available to all survivors of all levels of ability, as self-identified for survivors, that they're free of cost, that services and materials are available in preferred language of the survivor, and also really thinking about your materials and how they're developed and how they're written so that they're accessible to a larger group. Culturally specific response services, they're representative of the community's identified needs, available and relevant to all genders, to people of all sexual orientations, linguistically specific, and really considering and being aware of the impact of the historical and intergenerational trauma, and made available in locations that are relevant to the community. Present in a wide range of settings, this is what you would think is where are survivors, where is the best place to be able to provide advocacy, to provide your services. Of course, we hear a lot about mobile advocacy, you know, what's the access for people to be able to receive those services and being able to provide those in a range of settings. And then lastly, rooted in trauma-informed care principles, that programs and services are rooted in understanding the effects of trauma on the lives of survivors and those who serve them, that we support survivor growth and autonomy through collaboration and survivor-led decision-making, that programs are really mindful about what's their organizational capacity, what is their program culture, what is their staffing and services, and how do they respond to this, and then actively thinking about building vicarious resilience and secondary trauma. The last slide is moving from core to comprehensive. Here's just a few examples, and I think we've already heard some in some of our questions about what would be eligible and what would going beyond kind of the immediate service provision look like. So for crisis intervention, for example, that would be core service would be 24/7 availability, active listening, reinforcement of coping skills. Comprehensive services are core services plus looking at consistency in crisis intervention for survivors, offering face-to-face options, looking at training for staff and volunteers and techniques to help reduce trauma symptoms, and emergency housing assistance. Advocacy, some of the core services, medical options. We've talked about medical and legal accompaniment and advocacy. Core services for comprehensive would be those plus looking at what are longer-term medical needs that a survivor may need. Do they need accompaniment to OB/GYN? We've heard from programs often that are working with survivors around reproductive health options, also looking at other medical accompaniment for OB/GYN appointments or birth. Legal accompaniment and advocacy provided. Advocacy for other impacts on survivors if there's support needed around working with employers or schools, etc. Support for significant others. Core services may be information and referral, crisis intervention, moving to comprehensive services. That would be additional advocacy. It may be support groups, counseling, therapy, or offering child care to be able to support the healing journey. And support groups for sexual assault survivors. Comprehensive services may be support groups for specific survivorship or culturally specific support groups, and also offered in different languages. And we've talked about a little bit about holistic healing and survivor activism, but really the trauma-informed therapy and making sure that other activities or services are connected to this particular grant and the services that are already being provided. And of course, we're available, as well as to kind of dig into any of these to see like what that might look like or what other programs are doing, and to provide support around that, the coalitions, and really specifically for eligible or ineligible activities, of course, submitting those questions to Tara. Is there any questions about that?
Thanks, Jean. Anne-Marie has said this is so helpful, and is the slide available? Yes, it's slide number 44, and I'll be sending out the slides after the webinar.
I can also send the link to a write-up that talks about some of the things that I was talking about behind kind of the background of some of these slides, if that would be helpful as well.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, a couple of hot tips. We wanted to give an opportunity for DSHS and OCVA to share anything they might have on perspectives about the process.
Sure, this is Tara from OCVA. So generally, I would say that keep in mind it's a competitive application process, so proposals need to be clear and responsive to the application questions. And the biggest tip I have is to not assume that the reviewers, OCVA, DSHS, and the folks that we bring in to evaluate the applications, don't assume that we know your organization or your services. Write the proposal as if you're writing it for somebody that has never heard of you before. Don't assume we know all the details, because we can't exactly take all that into account if it's not there in the application for us to read.
So this is Judy. So Tara and Tricia, would that be, for example, that programs that are in a rural area or a remote area would need to, spell out what are the challenges that we're facing, and here's why we're asking for the things that may not be immediately understandable about why we need so much mileage, for example, or why we need this kind of service for a rural community?
Yes, I would include that, yeah, and err on that side of caution. Mm-hmm.
Great. And then I'm going to guess that it's also because you all are using a scoring process, so the scoring can only be based on what people apply for, what they say in their application, and that's why people need to pretend that they are writing to someone who's never heard of their program before. Is that right?
Yes, that's fair to say.
Okay. So Stephanie, was there anything you wanted to say about organizational capacity?
Just that, and I think actually that anything we have on organizational capacity might be related to cost allocation, which I think is coming up in another slide.
Okay.
I mean, it just really had to do with the ways that programs do have an opportunity with this funding to recover their and include in their budgets their administrative or overhead costs. So I think that may be connected to the the cost allocation slide.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, I will say, this is Tricia. The 2 points here on organizational capacity that's language from the VOCA rule. So just so folks know where that came from. Part of the application does include a discussion around your agency capacity to do what you are proposing to do. Again, that's attachment C, the proposal narrative. And we've done our best to be really clear about what we mean by those words capacity, but I think that would be really helpful for people to take a look at. In regards to this specific application, we want you to talk about your capacity to do the work, and if you feel like you don't currently have it, how are you going to get there? You need to talk about that in your proposal. And I think the coalitions would be excellent resources for talking through with that as you're developing your thoughts on what you would like to apply for with these funds. And then in regards to a few of the questions we've gotten in that 5-minute break, we were just chatting amongst ourselves here, and just wanted to clarify, you know, this application is intended to be different than the compensation and FTE enhancement application that was already released. And so if you are thinking of maybe adding a staff person, it would be helpful for reviewers to know why that is an enhancement and expansion and not something that was requested in the FTE increase application. I think that's an important consideration for folks, is we want to be moving this in an expansion and in a new way, you know, justifying why there is a need for this specifically. So if you're adding FTE to do your current scope of work, that's something that should have been addressed in the compensation and FTE application. If you haven't applied for that, there's a second opportunity this spring.
Great. So again, if you haven't applied for it, it's coming up. Okay, we're going to talk about some other funding opportunities coming up here in just a minute. Great. Excuse me. I also wanted to point out that this is an excellent opportunity to do work in historically marginalized communities and in tribes as collectively or to work with communities because this opportunity has a lot of flexibility which can address the needs of immigrants, communities of color, LGBTQ survivors, and tribes, etc. So feel free to contact your coalitions if you'd like to hear and get connected to peers around the state doing this kind of innovative work. So for example, the Crossing Borders Mobile Advocacy with Latino farm workers around sexual assault and domestic violence. The work that's happening with Forks-Abee's program and Healthy Families of Clallam County, working with several tribes around healing from historical trauma and resiliency with Native survivors. So those are just a few examples. Also, something to think about is just thinking through what could be some unintended consequences. You know, how has the feedback that survivors have given you and that you've gotten from advocates and community, how is that informing your plan? What's the straight line between that and what you're proposing to do? That's going to help support the success of your application. What are the true costs of expansion? Because there's can often be hidden costs that we don't think about for nonprofits about it. It costs money for us to expand our programs and serve more people. How are you going to cover that overhead? And so there will be, I think that Stephanie might have more to add here around being able to do a direct charge of admin, for example.
Yeah, and I think, you know, most of your programs are likely at least somewhat familiar with this through your budgeting for your current OCVA and DSHS contracts. So similar to, you know, your budgets for those ongoing contracts, you have a couple different options for what method you use for recovering those types of costs. So the application elaborates in the budget section, you know, how you can do direct charging for like administrative and facilities type costs, where, you know, you're sort of you have some method for directly calculating, you know, what part of, say your larger agency, your big executive director of your whole agency, what portion of their time is connected to the program. And then those of you that have, there's not a lot of programs in our state, but some programs have a negotiated indirect cost rate. You can, you have to actually with federal funding use that rate if you have one. And I won't go into all the details, but the application outlines those options that you have, and if you have questions about that as you're developing your budgets, you can reach out to Tara.
And this is Judy. I want to point out that in your giant application under Attachment E, which is the budget detail worksheet, there is a page for you to submit administrative costs. And it can be up to 15% of the total. So again, that's Attachment E. Okay, circling back to the top 10 questions, we wanted to just make sure that we touched on each of these. Tara, can you take this one away?
Yeah, Judy, did you want me to summarize? Just go back through the list real quick.
Yes.
Okay. So first question, is this a one-shot grant or is future funding secure? So what I'll say about the funding situation is, as you know, the federal funds that we pass through come with a disclaimer that continued funding is always contingent on the continued availability of that federal funding. And we know that federal funding is subject to a federal budgeting process. So we always have to say, you know, that we would extend the, you know, we often renew grants depending on the availability of funds. So that being said, the VOCA plan for Washington State is a blueprint for funding and grant programs through June 30th, 2019, including this expansion enhancement application. And OCVA and DSHS plan on funding these grant programs for these 2 years, so starting July 1st, 2017, and we're committed to continuing to support these efforts as long as we can. But moving on, the definition of emergency, again, is meeting the immediate health and safety needs of survivors. Number 3, flexible, survivor-driven open services versus restrictive. I hope you've heard that we're leaning towards the former and trying to be as inclusive and as flexible as possible with this funding. Allowable costs. We've talked through a lot of that, and I'd refer you back to page 7 of the application. Under eligible services, can we propose to hire new staff? Yes, and we just spoke to this briefly, making a distinction between the compensation and FTE, purpose, and the purpose of this application. In general, yes, you can propose to hire new staff to enhance or expand services. Number 6, can we hire a family law attorney? I see this as falling under the realm of civil legal assistance, and again, the Office of Civil Legal Aid has been funded to provide this type of assistance around the state. So let's talk more about how to connect local programs and survivors to OCLA subcontractors. Again, they're doing a workshop at the WCSAP annual conference on their services. They'll be doing outreach with DSHS and OCVA grantees to introduce themselves, and they've already started to attend the Crime Victim Service Center regional meeting. So you'll definitely be learning more about OCLA and their subcontracted services. Number 7, support or increase an existing program, or must it be new? It can be either or both. Number 8, can you do prevention? No, that is prohibited with VOCA money. Number 9, paying down a survivor's housing debt. That falls under the umbrella of rental and housing assistance, so certainly could be covered. What are the matching requirements? So this is page 14 of the application. Match is required. It tells you how to, the types of match that can be used and how to calculate that. And as we mentioned, you know, if you're not familiar with this, it's not a new requirement, but it's been something that OCVA and DSHS have been able to cover for you in the past with some of your grants and contracts. So with, you know, if you were a successful bidder and had a this 100% VOCA fund grants, the amount of your federal funding may surpass what we're able to cover for you in terms of match with state money. So we can help you work with those numbers, and more information is on page 14.
Great, thanks so much, Tara. Are there any questions at this point? I'm not seeing any written in. So, and I'm not seeing any hands.
Some additional thoughts here at the table.
Sorry?
We have some additional thoughts here at the table.
Awesome.
So we have a few kind of parting words on this list, and we're just thinking about, I know it's really, we often want to dig into all of the what ifs, and I understand the need to do that. And I hope you've heard OCVA and DSHS just really saying we're trying to do the best we can with this VOCA rule. We're learning it with you. And as Stephanie shared the great point of sometimes we need to just be able to explain a cost or justify a cost. And that's not intended to say it's not a need in your community or that we don't understand why you're asking that. We just have to be able to connect the matrix on our end, on the back end, about this specific funding being used for that purpose. So please just know that because it is a new rule, sometimes we have to dig into the weeds a little bit on that to try and figure it out. But you know, we've tried to do our best to clearly say what is not eligible, and that's that one page in the application that says ineligible services. So take a look at that, and then you know, go through the services and expenses that we've listed that are eligible. We've tried to be as flexible, as open, and increase our ability to meet people's needs in your communities. A few of those things listed on the ineligible services list are things that we're already paying for with other funding sources. So that's something we're always looking at to be good stewards of these funds is if we're already putting a significant amount of money into a different grant opportunity, we don't want to duplicate that here. So that's why a few of those things are listed. Otherwise, they're also maybe just blatantly not allowed through the VOCA funds. As Judy has kindly repeatedly offered, it is a giant application. So I will say I'll offer a positive reframe on that. First off, the narrative is really only 30 pages, 33. On the website, we did try to pull out each individual section so you can get the application narrative on its own, which is those 30 pages, and then each of the documents which you actually need to complete, which are what we call attachments. So that's what you're completing for the application. And the narrative is what you will need to read through in order to be successful in completing those attachments. A huge portion of the application is the appendices, which are each specific to the program type. So you may not need to look at all of those. You know, there is one for sexual assault, there's one for domestic violence, and there's one for victims of crime. And those are things that are really specific to our program areas and our service requirements and our granting processes or contract processes. So that's why those are in the appendix. And we included them all so you can have the information and have all of it at your disposal. It may not all be applicable to you. And that size of it is also related to the fact that this is the first time OCVA and DSHS have, across programs, worked together to put an application together. So we're doing our best to streamline it for you, and hopefully it works.
Well, yeah, it's not a critique. I think that you've offered a lot of really helpful information for a very exciting funding opportunity, and hats off to OCVA and DSHS for your fantastic work on this. We're almost there. I want to just point out that the questions and answers will be posted on the OCVA funding page. So is that something, Tara or Tricia, you could speak to?
Yes, so I'll be collecting questions via email. I'll answer them over email, but I will also compile everything into a Q&A document that will be posted on the OCVA website March 6th and I've been saying March 27th, but I'm taking questions through March 27th, so it'll probably actually be posted on the website the 28th.
Super. So people should check back on the OCVA website on March 6th and March 28th to see what the Q&A is.
Well, intermittently in between.
Yeah, we will be, and we will update that as frequently as needed in between those two solid dates.
Okay, and then after that point, there are no more questions.
That's right.
Okay. And I will send out these slides, and it sounds like Jean also has a resource to offer. And then we had two more questions, which I will combine, which was, is VOCA considered 100% federal? Are these funds state or federal?
They are federal funds 100%.
Okay. Awesome. Well, we are happy to hear from you, from your coalitions. You can contact Jean at WSCAP or myself, Judy Chen, at WSCADV. We would love to hear from you. Thank you all very much for the important work that you do every day with survivors and victims and communities. It's just such a privilege to be with you all. Again, my apologies for the technical difficulties. My dream is to one day do a webinar where it all runs smoothly, and one day it'll happen. Thanks everyone for your kind attention, and hats off to the OCVA and DSHS folks. Woo! And we'll be in touch soon. Thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.